I think we were selling something very different, and it took a guy who wanted to jump onto something that they could make themselves really part of. So I think, we weren't going to be very attractive to guys who wanted to join, SAE or, some tried and true old fraternity on campus where everything was in place. We were appealing to guys that wanted to be part of something new and special, and we tended to attract guys that maybe were a little bit entrepreneurial. Hey, I want to be on board on this thing. And that's what we sold.
We had such a very casual atmosphere throughout the members of the house, number one. We dressed casually. We weren't wearing the typical fraternity getup, V-neck sweaters, wingtips. Number two is the fact that really the meetings weren't really strict per se. You didn't have any, you didn't have any of these mistos and secret handshakes and whatever. But also, what also grew our membership is likes tend to draw likes. And we ended up with a lot of different types of athletic people.
Being in the first pledge class, we didn't really have a lot of rules on what to follow in being a fraternity. So we kind of did things the way we wanted to. We didn't take things too seriously. And I think the reputation kind of got around the campus that we were kind of a cool house. We attracted surfers, we attracted water polo players, and we had a great location to put in TGIS. Thank God it's Friday. So at Friday, we would have a big party, invite the campus, and so everybody knew about the DU TGIS.
I think it probably helped. It did have visibility. It was well positioned for the time. I think that, it always helps to have a good physical structure when you're trying to get started. And it gave us a certain amount of presence on campus.
It was perceived as a party house. It was perceived as very casual. We had, at that time, a lot of surfers who were members of our fraternity, a lot of athletes. I mentioned the young men who came from Coronado. A lot of them were top athletes at Coronado High School prior. A lot of swimmers, a lot of water polo players. So we had surfers, athletes, and then myself.
People who like to start things have something in common, perhaps in terms of personality type, but they didn't know exactly what. Well, that what became this very interesting sort of multi-perspective, different dimensional sort of house where there was nothing that we said we could not do. So that meant we could excel in athletics, we could excel in academics, we could excel at partying. And so all of those elements, there was nothing to limit us, to define us, to stereotype us. And of course, it was married with the times, the late 1960s.
I think that was right. We were the surfing fraternity, and we threw the greatest parties on the campus by acclamation. And we were the only non-secret fraternity in the country. And let's not forget, we were also the first fraternity to integrate, to incorporate, and to go international. I remember that from my pledge book. So all of that boded well for us. But beneath that, there was this underpinning that made all of that work. And that underpinning was the 1960s. The escalation of the Vietnam War and the draft and the Civil Rights Act of 1965. Those two events were really the cornerstones of campus rebellion in America over the next 5 years. And here comes DU, falling through the ether, through this, morass of change and flux, staring down 17 well-established fraternities. But fraternities steeped in tradition and the status quo and secrecy at a time when the campus was beginning to cry out for freedom of speech and transparency. And here we are, this fresh face, this free spirit, no baggage. We could be anything we wanted to be, and we chose to be the Uncola. We chose to be really, I think, what the campus wanted us to be, or at least hoped we'd grow into. The fraternity of social and cultural change and inclusion. And it was that free spirit that drew the campus to our doorstep like a magnet.
Nobody approached me. I remember sitting in the Commons, the East Commons of San Diego State, with John Baltus, one of the founders, who was a high school buddy of mine. And he pulled out the Daily Aztec, and there was an article that said DU was on campus, and they were looking for, I'm not sure they said 10, but a number of men to start a fraternity at San Diego State.
We were basically part of a meeting that took place as a result of the international fraternity deciding San Diego State would be a good place to have a Delta Upsilon chapter. And so they sent two representatives from the San Jose State chapter that had graduated, and one working for the fraternity, another a good friend of his, Ray Carpenter, and Dwayne Holman. And they were able to put together a meeting on the San Diego State campus for in the evening. There were about 40 of us.
I think we thought there were 40 or 50 guys at that first meeting. And then there was an additional meeting, and they kept paring it back and screening. And then I think finally I remember a formal interview. So they chose a variety of guys by age, class, and school, and whatever else they were looking for. But it looked like a thoughtful process, and then they picked 10 of us.
I was living in a dormitory my freshman year. I'd already gone through Rush and wasn't happy with a lot of the fraternities because they made you buy Tattersall pants, V-neck sweaters, wingtips, et cetera, and I was a beach person. I grew up in Coronado, California, and I just wasn't happy with what they were promoting. On my dorm, there were two members that had apparently been interviewed for this new chapter that was starting. I went to 3 other meetings, and by the 3rd meeting, we decided, okay, you can be a member, and at this point, you'll be 10th, and that'll be the original founding fathers.
I was introduced informally through a person I had met in the dorm. And so when he brought up the opportunity, he said it's a different sort. It was the beginning of something. I, by nature, and anyone who would know me, even the people who have met me since the time of my involvement with DU at San Diego State, would be very surprised that I was ever a member of a fraternity. And so this opportunity came, and I guess what intrigued me the most was the possibilities, because it was something that was beginning. It was something that I felt I could go and make perhaps a difference. And as it turned out, it was an amazing experience. And for someone who by nature was not a person who would join a fraternal organization.
Yeah, that was Gary Gullahan's mom, who had a house near campus, and he was first president, and I believe that was our first official meeting in the garage. We had got together on campus or here or there for stuff, but we needed a place, and you know, I mean, he said, my mom has a house near campus, and we can use the garage, and great. You know, we wanted to do it, and you got to start somewhere, so we started at the bottom.
There were 10 of us there. And I think all 10 were there. And we discussed how we wanted to proceed as a group and what we were going to do. And as I recall, we didn't have either advisor, Ray Carpenter or Dwayne, at that meeting. We were on our own.
Tell me, if you would, can you name off the founders of the SDSU chapter?
Yes, we'll start alphabetically with John Baltus, Dave Elliott, Mike Hartel, yours truly, Bruce Howard, Lynn Hunt, Bill Plemons, Jim Renfro, Mike Truitt, Hank Tyson, and Dave Williams were the original 10 founding members.
Well, I remember I was secretary treasurer, the first secretary treasurer. I remember having to take notes there, and that's about, You know, that's so many years back, it's hard to remember that meeting.
Right.
But, I mean, I know where some of the other meetings were. We actually later moved at Brian Dapper's apartment, which was on a curve on College Avenue. Later, they used my apartment, which I was rooming with 3 other DUs. We used it just before we bought the house.
You know, maybe I'm getting a little bit old here, but I'm trying to remember exactly why I went with Dave Williams, who was one of our early presidents, and he actually left the fraternity pretty early. That was one of the tough things about an early fraternity. We had a lot of guys show interest in joining, and they fell off. So, you know, 10 went to 5 pretty fast, then the other guys came on. Some of those guys left. So for some reason, that day, maybe I didn't have a class, but we had heard through the grapevine, and we were saying, you know, we need housing. We're actually looking for somewhere to rent. So we heard that Dr. Brown, who was an accounting professor at San Diego State, had this house at 5606 Hardy. He actually planned to sell this house to a fraternity. That's how he built it.
It was a great location because we had parking for 24 cars. It had big enough living room for meetings. Clear out the furniture. It was a great place to have social functions.
So we knocked on the door, and I remember it just like it was yesterday. And this professor, who was getting on in his career, answered the door. He was there, and he said, "Hello, gentlemen. What can I do for you?" Very nice and gracious, and he talked to us for a while. So tell me about your organization, a few questions. And then he said, "Okay, man, exactly who's going to purchase this house?" You know, I'm a freshman, you know, and Dave doesn't look much older, I'm sure. So we gave him, I believe it was Bob Gage's number at the time.
The alumni were pretty helpful in giving us the opportunity to get this house. Without the alumni support, we would never have had a chance at doing it. And they were able to finally negotiate a price for the house, and the international fraternity actually lent us the money to make the down payment, which I believe was around $10,000. And the Alumni Association assumed the mortgage responsibility for 5606 Hardy.
Gage and Adelman were the two key, John Adelman and Bob Gage. There were several others that we knew, and they participated in our meetings. And they went directly to Dr. Brown. And believe it or not, those men signed on the note. It was a 40-year note, and it was 4% interest, might have been 4.5%. It was in the 4% range, and it was fully amortized, and there was a monthly payment that was somewhere around $600 a month. And that's what he wanted. These young alums, I say young, they were probably 35 to 40. Adelman, Gage, Manus, Hartley, all these guys. And they signed on that note. And amazingly enough, they got some help from DU International, who signed a guarantee. I think Bill was our 10th guy. We had little events to try to get more guys so that we could build onto that 10. I mean, it's hard to start a house with 10 guys. It's pretty small. We don't have a house at that point. We're meeting in Gary Gullahan, the first president's mother's garage. I mean, how do you attract members to that? Understand, this was a colony. This was Alpha Delta Upsilon at this point. We don't become a charter DU chapter until the spring of 68. And so these guys that we were trying to build quickly onto the original 10, they really were on pledge in name. They were probably given their pins within 2 or 3 weeks of meeting us. Once we vetted them and said, these guys look good, we joined them on. And so, in fact, the first real pledge class that rushed on campus at San Diego State out of the Alpha Phi House.
It was us, the fall pledge class of 1966. I mean, who are we kidding? Even that pledge class, if that's what you want to call it, even those guys thought of themselves as neophytes. I know because my cousin Jim Byrne was one of them. Jimmy was the what we call the 11th man. He was the first member tapped after the original founding members had been selected. And even Jim, to this day, calls himself a neophyte. The founding members knew they couldn't rush successfully with 10 guys, so they went and got themselves 10 more. They padded their numbers. And by doing that, they doubled their size, and that allowed them to have an effective rush in the fall of 1966. And, kudos to them because it worked.
We were all anxious to get this thing built. I think it was always, how are we going to get numbers? How are we going to get members? How are we going to recruit with where we are? But, it went very well, and others will tell you, with that first rush at the Alpha Phi House, the chapter just began growing and in great numbers and really honestly quality numbers quickly. And we were quite a story on campus over the first few years.
I had the contact with the U. I liked the idea. I only had 2 years left at San Diego State. The idea of going through a rush and a whole freshman group that would probably be pledges, and I just thought maybe this was a better way to go. And since I had some experience and was a little bit senior to the group, that I could be of help in establishing this chapter.
Well, they had no mistos. They had no secret handshakes. Meetings were open. It was just a bunch of light guys that were all looking to have a good time, really, and have a great social life.
Frankly, it appealed to me to not have to go through, in those days, what was called Hell Week, and every fraternity had it. And this sounded a lot better. Maybe it was a little bit of my entrepreneurial feelings that, I like to start something and be part of it and lead it from the beginning. So given that opportunity, I was interested in doing it.
Maynard is one of my fraternity brothers, Keith Eshelman. And we rushed that fall semester together. And I remember thinking, going into these houses, there were like 4,000 guys in each house. And all we were going to be is a number. So we decided, even though they were rushing us out of a sorority house, we decided that this was the house for us, where we could start at the ground floor and make something of the house, put something of ourselves into the house.
We really, at the time, didn't know. It was kind of like a leap of faith on, these guys in this house seem kind of cool. The ideas seem kind of cool. We didn't really know what we were getting into, and so we said, let's all just join. Let's go for it and see how it works out. That Hell Week was really pretty much done, I think, by the founders because it was something that fraternities did. It was a tradition of being in a fraternity that you would haze your pledges. I think they did that just because it was something that was being done. I think in retrospect, looking back after it was done, they kind of looked at it and said, this isn't the character of this house.
We had as pledges what was then called, and only for that year, Hell Week, for 1 week, where a lot of unusual things happened.
Other things we did, we ate raw liver, we ate raw onions, and I recall this kind of shows that we really cared a lot about each other as a group.
There were so many memories from Hell Week. And by the way, again, we called it Hell Week because we had to wear an onion around our neck for 5 days, and I was allergic to onions. But by God, you did it.
What you would do is you'd have an onion in a rope around your neck, and so the actors would tell you, take a bite of your onion. So you'd go like this and take a bite of the raw onion, and they'd have to eat it. Well, because Snap wouldn't eat the onion, when it was his turn to take a bite, I'd go take the bite for him.
Maynard, again, my roommate, my pledge brother, he knew I was breaking out in hives from these onions, and I missed a question legitimately, and Maynard said, I'll take the bite. And Maynard looked at these guys, and he took a bite out of this onion like it was a Washington Delicious apple.
So it kind of shows that we did things together, and there was just a lot of just brotherhood and love between all the members of the fraternity.
And believe it or not, our pledge class and the other founding members voted after that Hell Week to not have Hell Week anymore and to have Help Week. So every year thereafter, for the new pledges, basically the house would be renovated, painted, whatever needed to be done.
Chris Baldwin, who we affectionately call Iggy, will probably be here to talk as well. And he was the mastermind of this. About 6 of us, 6 of the 9, I remember after Hell Week, we went to a sandwich shop on College Avenue, and we were eating, and Iggy said, well, what do you think of this Hell Week? And to a man, everybody said, well, this doesn't seem productive. And Iggy said, I don't even want to be here if we're going to do this every semester. So Iggy decided that we'd change this name to Help Week.
Well, I learned from that early pledge book, one of the things as a pledge is we had to learn a bit of the history of DU. I remember that it traced itself back to Williams College, and it had these characteristics of being a fraternity that was a non-fraternity. And the original pledge trainer was Jim Renfro, one of the people who talked on this tape. And on that pledge week, he went and he followed or imitated what he had connected with in his previous fraternal experience. And it was a bit more of a traditional Hell Week, a little bit of sleep deprivation, a variety of different physical challenges, things of this nature. I, of course, didn't want to resist, but I knew I wanted to change. But I was very receptive when there were those who were my brothers who were reconsidering, do we want to go down this road? I was very quick to drop in certain historical nuggets that I had picked up that lent itself to having truly a fraternity that wasn't in any way following the traditional role of fraternity. And I felt that where that began is at its inception. That's with your pledges first.
I graduated from high school as a 17-year-old and a freshman at San Diego State. And you're thrown out, independent, on your own. And finding a fraternity really gave you an identity and gave us a family. And what we did was we did everything together, and we had so much fun. And we became and ingrained and formed this family, and that was really our identity at the time.
Well, number one, I mentioned it already, Hell Week, which then was stopped after that. The parties I remember very well. I wasn't living in the house in my first year, but I did move into the house in my sophomore and junior years at San Diego State, and that was quite an experience, living in a frat house for 2 years.
Well, let's not forget that our institution of higher learning was, 25 miles from the Tijuana border? I mean, you don't have to have much of an imagination to figure out what 25 19-year-olds did with that little tidbit. Really, for me, though, that first semester was a coming-of-age story, and Tijuana was part of it. I learned very quickly that you and your fraternity were measured by 2 yardsticks. You were measured by the parties you threw or went to, and you were measured by the banners you won. That's not to say that grades didn't matter. They did. You weren't measured by them, though. You had to get good grades to stay in school, sure, and everybody wanted to stay in school to remain a DU. We had this house that sat right on top of Aztec Bowl. Everybody knew where we were. And then we threw parties because of that were like small concerts. And then the next day you'd get up on the weekend and you would play sports. The way it worked was there were 3 leagues. If you were a small house like us, you were in the Red League at the bottom. And if you won the Red League, you moved up to the White League the following year. And if you won the White League the year after that, you moved up to the Black League. And at the top of the Black League, the top of the intramural athletic food chain, sat the vaunted Sigma Chi fraternity house that had most of the scholarship athletes on campus and won all of the sports banners every year, it seemed, until DU knocked them off. We won 3 banners in 3 divisions in 3 years. And we threw the best parties on the planet, and we were the darlings of every GDI at San Diego State. And that's what I remember about that first semester and those first few years.
Wow, that is probably the most important question that I can answer. And DU has had such an impact on my life. I would say that Delta Upsilon has probably had the most major impact on my life, other than meeting my wife and starting my family. But frankly, I met her as a DU little sister, and so we'll go right back to DU again. There's just something about your DU brothers that are a friendship that's forged for a lifetime in the early growing up years, and they're such a part of your life. And I know that every DU that has had a fulfilling experience will say the same thing.
It's given me, over the years, a sense of belonging to an important organization that goes beyond just a membership. I do think that, it's a wonderful time in life to be a student and going through the things you're going through, but it's a lot more meaningful if you're doing it with other people that you're going to see again and again over a lifetime.
Well, actually, being in a fraternity never really meant that much to me per se as a fraternity, but for the friendships you make, we still have the same group of guys. We don't see each other a lot, but we see each other every now and then, not necessarily all of us together, but different groups at a time, and we're still friends. And we're still happy and still having fun together.
I think in high school I was somewhat of a nerd, and coming into DU just totally changed my life. I became more social, went to more parties, and just became more outgoing as a result of getting to know all the brothers and the little sisters. It was a remarkable experience for me. I was able to come back and be a leader in my community, I think, because of what I did and what I learned with DU.
Well, ultimately, for me, DU boils down to this community of people that I've met. The individuals that talked previously on this tape, I've known them for 50 years. They are not identical to me. Many of them have followed similar patterns, but some of them definitely have not. But every time we get together, there's a bond. There's an instant bond and instant sharing.
The DU experience was incredible for me. Going to high school, I was kind of a surfer, kind of a little bit of a loner. Going to San Diego State and getting a fraternity, I became a member of a group and a real participant in the membership of the DUs. And we made incredible friends through the 4.5 years, and actually lifelong friends that I still do a lot of things with today.
Lifetime friends. It's amazing how many you end up hanging around later on in life. I'll just say this much. You're going to get out of DU as much as you want to put into it, and the more you put into it later on in life, you're going to enjoy it, and you're going to look back and realize that, your time in college with your DU brothers are probably one of the best times you've had in your life.
Just as long